morning in Mexico, afternoon in the Mediterranean. My name is Guadalupe González Chavez, and I am the coordinator of the Global, Regional, and Interregional Issues Knowledge Network at the Consejo Mexicano de Asuntos Internacionales. On behalf of Dr. Sergio Alcocer and Ivan Martin, I want to welcome all our participants to this conversation. We are honored to welcome you all to the first COMEXI and the Policy Center for the New South in Morocco webinar. COMEXI and PCNS are establishing a relationship to facilitate exchange of information and experience on topics of mutual interest, and in which we believe the lessons learned in our countries and regions can benefit each other. Today, we will be exchanging and collaborating to reflect on our common realities and concerns between Morocco and Mexico. Cultural diversity, intercultural dialogue and challenges, geographical positions, and our participation in different regions give us the ground for this conversation related to the migration phenomena in both countries and regions. In a diverse expression, Mexico and Morocco share many similar conditions when we talk about the South-North dynamics and region-to-region relations, when raising the migration phenomena in our countries and when a global approach is needed to respond to this new panorama. Let me introduce our distinguished participants, and first, our moderator today, Ivan Martin. Ivan Martin is an economist, senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South and professor of international migrations at the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco. Francisco Alba is an economist and demographer, professor and researcher at the Colegio de Mexico in Mexico. His areas of research are international migration, migration policies of Mexico and of the United States, implication of demographic changes on economic and social development, regional integration processes, particularly in North America. Mamal El-Quasif is an international relations specialist at the Policy Center for the New South. She is also a former Blue Book trainee in the Directorate General of Employment for Social Affairs and Inclusion in the European Commission in Brussels. Her area of interest includes Africa, Europe, cooperation, and migration. Carlos Heredia is an economist, founding and associate member of the Mexican Council of Foreign Relations, and served as vice president of the organization from 2003 to 2006. He has been a parliamentary in our country and has held various positions in the Mexican executive branches of government, apart from being an academic. He has authored and writes fortnightly in the New Mexican newspaper El Universal, and is a frequent commentator in the media on foreign policy, international cooperation and development, migration, North American integration, multilateral banking, and Mexico-China relations. Well, I give you the voice. Ivan, thank you.
Thank you very much, Guadalupe. Welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure for me to facilitate this webinar between the Policy Center for the New South and the Consejo Mexicano de Asuntos Internacionales, COMEXI. And it is a pleasure first because as a professor, I teach in Barcelona, at the University of Barcelona, I teach a course on comparative research in migration at the Universidad Pompeu Fabra. And let me say that Morocco and Mexico are an obvious choice for these comparisons. Actually, I have supervised a couple of master theses on comparative migration experiences between Mexico and Morocco. And this is particularly relevant this year of 2023, where by chance, there is the 60th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries, between Morocco and Mexico. Let me say that this is not a new field. I have quickly done a research. I have found 3 PhDs on this topic, one already in 2006 in the MIT in the US, one in 2017 in the Colegio de la Frontera Norte in Mexico, one in 2019 in Valencia in Spain, and a few of other, for instance, the seminal article of 2010 by Hein de Haas and Simona Bezzoli on the same topic. So we have already a basis to build on in the comparison between the two countries. And the reason for that is that they share comparable trajectories, I would say. They were both countries of origin, of massive labor migration, in the case of Morocco to first France and the rest of the European Union, later Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain. In the case of Mexico, mainly, of course, to the United States. And in the 90s and in the 90s of the last century, of the 20th century, in the 2000s, in the case of Morocco, they became countries of transit for migration, largely irregular migration coming from the south, from sub-Saharan Africa in the case of Morocco, from Latin America, mainly Central America in the case of Mexico, to the United States and to Europe in both cases. And this has posed or positioned both countries in similar patterns of relations with the big neighbors to the north. On the one hand, migration has become increasingly a central issue in relations with the US in the case of Mexico, with the European Union in the case of Morocco, which are also key economic and social and political partners, of course, but they have also, I would say, similar patterns of externalization of migration policies or outsourcing of migration policies by the US and European Union, which try to keep the migration problems outside the borders in Mexico or in Morocco. Both have been very cooperative in terms of trying to regulate the migration flows and to cooperate in the regular and safe management of these migration flows, and both have or are facing similar challenges in terms of managing irregular migration. They have to face the presence in the territories of thousands, or in some cases, even in the case of Mexico, hundreds of thousands of irregular migrants, which are very vulnerable. They have put in place policies to address the assistance to those migrants, but also in some cases their integration into the labor markets or the regularization. And they have both of them, I would say, very similar border control issues and challenges to face. So in this framework that I'm just displaying in order to frame the discussions and the contributions from Carlos, from Amal, and from Francisco, I would like to pose three questions, maybe not for the first interventions, but for the discussion later. First is, to which extent both countries, Mexico and Morocco, can learn from each other. They share similar migration patterns, similar challenges. To which extent they can learn from each other. Second issue, to which extent they can advance in some form of South-South cooperation in order to also deepen their relations this year that the 60th anniversary is marked. I will remember just going through the press. I have seen in 2022 already a parliamentary mission of the Mexican parliament visited Morocco. And one of the three key issues for the dialogue with Moroccan authorities was precisely migration, together with climate change, for instance. And third question is, to which extent both Morocco and Mexico can undertake common initiatives in the global governance of migration, of international migration. I dare to remind that in 2018, the Global Compact on Migration was signed. Interestingly, Mexico was the co-chair with Switzerland of the intergovernmental conference that led to the Global Compact on Migration, and the Global Compact was adopted in Marrakesh. So both countries played a key role in this process. And also in another one of the Global Fora on Migration, which is the Global Forum on Migration and Development, Global Migration and Development Forum. Both of them have had the presidency at some point, Mexico in 2010, Morocco in 2018. So in this framework, with these questions to address later in the discussion, I can only tell you that I'm sure that the contributions by your three speakers will be enlightening. And without further ado, I give the floor to Carlos Heredia for a first round of 10 minutes each, and then we will open for discussions, for questions, and of course for at least a second turn of interventions by the speakers. Carlos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. I want to thank both COMEXI and PCNS for the invitation to participate in this conversation. I would like to start by initially addressing Ivan's questions and posing more questions for the discussion amongst all of us. I guess the first one would be to respond to what we can learn from each other. I do not know the Moroccan experience in detail, so that's why I will pose it in question form rather than in statements. But I think it is important to take a look at how each country is managing crucial issues. First one is a system of information on migration, to have your own figures, your own data, that you're able to generate data that does not depend, in the case of Mexico, from the data that the United States generates. We can rely on that, we can use that, but we need to know what is happening regarding the flows through Mexico, in Mexico, and back to Mexico. And most of the time, now we do rely on statistics from Customs and Border Protection in the United States to know what is going on in our own territory. So I would start by asking, is Morocco able to generate its own statistics, or does it rely largely on the figures generated by the European Union? The second question on cooperating with each other. There's the ever-present question as to what does a country from the global south ask / obtain from the big neighbors to the north if the big neighbors to the north say, let's cooperate on migration. Let's cooperate on migration basically translates into you play the role of migration containment. And I will compensate you for doing that, either monetarily, either politically, geopolitically, or in any other way. So that's an ever-present question, you know. I guess both of us look at the Turkish case in its deal with the European Union regarding Syrian refugees. And in Mexico, we do not have enough information as to what exactly the Mexican government has negotiated with the United States government, both in the Trump four-year term and now under the Biden administration. Okay, we're playing the role of gatekeepers. We're playing the role of immigration containment. I don't like to call these agreements because they were not publicly held, and we do not know the outcome of the agreements between the two governments, let alone the two heads of state. We only learn of the results in practice when policies or measures are taken and implemented at the ground level. So that's, I guess, another question. What has been the experience of Morocco negotiating, well, in the first place with its immediate neighbor, Spain, and then with the European Union as a whole, when the big power says, I will compensate you for playing the role of gatekeeper? And to add another question, I guess I can also ask the experts from PCNS, can you speak of a migrant-centered can you speak of migration policy that at least partially can also be based on the migrants themselves? Or are we only talking about the political interests of the nation states that are participating, or the region, or the European Union, or the United States? Because to a good extent, even though, Ivan, you celebrated with reason that Mexico played a leading role in Marrakesh, Mexico has played a leading role many times, and yet what we see at the ground level, and Francisco is the leading expert on this. For example, what we saw as the outcome of Remain in Mexico, the Migrant Protection Protocol, was absolutely disastrous. It was neither a protection tool nor a policy that was devised jointly to really address issues of security, issues of human rights, and so on and so forth. And the actual result was that the migrants that have been deported or returned from the United States end up being largely on their own, abandoned by a government that not even in the first place had the intention of taking care of the migrants. There may be some joint statements signed in Washington, but that does not translate into what they signed. Mexico has not allowed 1 peso to welcome those persons that are not Mexican nationals, that are going to be and are being returned from the United States as we speak. So I see it as a big hypocrisy to say that everything is all right, that we have solved the problem, that we have figured out the challenges of migration because we signed a statement in Washington. And yet, we see at the ground levels things like the, I'm sorry, but I have to call it a state crime in Ciudad Juarez on March 27, when 40 migrants, basically from Central and South America, were incinerated in a government facility. 40 migrants were burned in a government facility, an illegal prison that was operated by Mexican authorities, which has gone in total impunity. So I start with this provocation so that we are sure to address not only what the covenants say, but what is really happening to migrants and migrant families at the ground level. So, voila.
Thank you very much, Carlos. This is very much also the role of think tanks to provoke thought, to question and evaluate policies, and to identify areas for intervention by public authorities, but civil society as well. So thank you very much for these thought-provoking first words. And I give the floor to Amal El Wasif from the Policy Center for the New South as second speaker today. Amal.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you for the participants of the panel. It's a very a big pleasure to be among you and to be able to discuss this subject that is very, let's say, very important, but also very sensitive. And I have to say that I have prepared a different presentation, but I cannot not react to the questions that were directly addressed to me by Mr. Carlos on the similarities of the challenges that are faced by our two countries. Well, when it comes to the case of Morocco, and I'll try to really, within this allocated 10 minutes, try at my best to answer the questions you have addressed to me. So the first one on data, I do find similarities on what you said regarding the challenges of data. Morocco, I think Morocco is not 100% relying on the numbers and figures of the European Union under the Frontex. I am sure that Morocco, through different channels, like the studies done by the HCP, Haut Commissariat au Plan, which is really the national institution working on statistics in Morocco, is regularly conducting research and surveys to know how many people are living in Morocco, migrants, but mainly regular migrants. So regular migrants, yes, we do have figures that are provided by Morocco because they have ways to know who is legally residing in through calling, the national and local entities, the municipalities, etc. So this we have an idea, and this is roughly around 1,100 according to the latest figures. Now, when it comes to irregular migrants, yes, I agree with you that we do not have like a clear and agreed upon figure, simply because it's really hard to be able to actually track and know these migrants, because by definition they are living irregularly, so they make their best not to be detected by the by national channels. And what we have now are also the data that are published by Frontex, because they have they regularly publish figures in which they tell how many people actually crossed through Morocco and through the frontier that we have with Spain. So this is an idea that we have, but I'm also convinced that the directorate, the National Directorate of the Protection and Surveillance of External Borders have their figures also, and have a clearer idea about how many irregular attempts are being made. So if I may add on this point. And let me also share with you a recent development that is not that recent, but actually the fact that Morocco is hosting the African Observatory on statistics of migration, the national, the African Observatory on Migration, which is a continental observatory that has the mission of establishing and being able to have clear data on migration at the African continent. So Morocco is taking the lead on this initiative. It's just a matter of time that the institution actually will start really operating and then be able to provide data on this specific field. Regarding the agreements with European countries, and you were right in starting by mentioning the neighboring countries. I think, and Ivan Martin surely knows better than me as well, that the level of cooperation between Morocco and Spain on the questions of irregular migration is quite advanced, and most of the interactions have been positive. If I'm not mistaken, Morocco and Spain have been conducting joint patrols on the frontiers and have really been enjoying a very good level of collaboration and cooperation on this specific question. It's very often for also the Spanish government to thank Morocco for its role. For instance, last year they said that 18,000 people have regularly migrated through Morocco, but then another 18 18,000 people have been prevented from migrating from the Moroccan side. It's about an important migration pressure. Now, when it comes to the collaboration and cooperation at the European Union level, then things get a little bit complicated, because simply the European Union has its different frameworks of looking at the question of migration, and sometimes they lack clarity when it comes to negotiating and to actually having this dialogue with third countries, like the case of Morocco. I do agree with you. There have been pressures on making Morocco as a gatekeeper for Europe, but then Morocco was really clear on this specific aspect, refusing any attempts to have migration centers, refusing to externalize, to be another country that is externalizing the control of Europe's frontiers. This is why some specific points were actually posing challenges, among them the readmission of third nationals. Morocco has some specific agreements with other African countries. Their nationals, they can come to Morocco and live for 3 months and then come back, etc. But if there were any pressures to sign readmission agreements, then this would also jeopardize the policies of Morocco and its ambition to be a country that is bridging between Europe and Africa. So yes, at the level of the discussion with the EU, the situation is quite challenging because of pressures for Morocco to be a gatekeeper for Europe, a situation that Morocco has clearly refused in different occasions. And also your third question was it if we have in Morocco a policy that is centered on migrants, that is taking migrants into account. In 2013, there was the adoption of the National Strategy on Migration and Asylum in Morocco, which is a policy that even if it doesn't have, it is not legally binding, it doesn't have, it doesn't involve any kind of, well, let's say, consequences if it's not applied, but it is a very exhaustive framework in which Morocco has tried to institutionalize so many things that were done to prove that Morocco is sincere in its policy of taking advantage of migration and preventing irregular migration. So the main pillars of this policy is to try to integrate the people who can be integrated in Morocco and prevent irregular migration and human smuggling. So to be brief, because I think I'm getting close to my 10 minutes, the main axis of this policy is to try to regularize the situation of people who could be regularized, and this has been done through two main campaigns. One in 2014 with 18,000 people who were normalized, and then 2017 with 25,000 people who were normalized as well, given administrative papers. And then also it involves the fact that education for the children of migrants, regardless of their administrative situations, is being granted, and also access to the basic but very basic health coverage. So and also, of course, recommendations for different cities, municipalities, stakeholders in integrating and including the migrants in different cultural and cultural programs, etc. So of course this policy is there, but there are challenges. For instance, we did not done any more regularization campaigns since 2017, although people are asking for this regularization, but they were not reconducted, for instance. So this is from the administrative point of view. And also the fact that sometimes in parts of Morocco, there are pressures on public services, like on schools, on public transportation, on health. So even the citizens, sometimes they're having troubles to access some of these services. And of course, then the migrants themselves will be also exposed to these kind of issues. And last point, also about the territorialization of this policy. It has been decided by the government. and the municipalities, cities, local authorities were advised to really respect this policy and try to integrate the migrants and make them aware of their rights to basic health coverage and access to education. But this is not necessarily done across all the cities in the same way. So I would say these are really the challenges of this existing national strategy on migration and asylum.
Thank you, Amal, for presenting the Moroccan experience very synthetically. Thank you very much. And we go on to our third speaker, which is Francisco. Please, the floor is yours, Francisco Alba.
Okay. Thank you. Gracias. First of all, I thank for this invitation, and it's a pleasure really to participate in this dialogue. The dialogue is already going on. I had, as Amal said, a little bit prepared a few notes a little bit different, but I think now it's better to continue like in this dialogue. Well, first of all, I would like to say that in relation with Ivan to say that three questions, but there is I want to make a comment on the second in this South-to-South cooperation and common initiatives. Just to remember that Morocco and Mexico had a long tradition of this sort of South-to-South cooperation or common initiatives. Not only what you mentioned in relation to the global compact on migration, but in the 80s, Morocco and Mexico cooperated very, very much in trying to advance, and eventually it was in 1990 where the UN adopted the International Convention for the Protection of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. So, I mean, this is so we have a long experience on this, and I think, I mean, is looking forward to continue doing that. And there is plenty, as we have heard from the issues and here and there, plenty of subjects to try to, come with some sort of common initiative or something like that. It's not that easy. It's a question of diplomatic and so on and so forth. But I mean, the point is very well taken. I have listed a little bit that I'm going to go over that very rapidly. That for this dialogue, I thought, and just to insist a little bit, that it's quite interesting to look at what I call the similarities, but also some differences in the two countries. That probably would provide some ground to make, comparing differences and similarities probably is a way to approach and try to come with new ideas. So the similarities, I think, are common, have already been mentioned. I won't go into that, but I would like to make a couple of comments in terms of differences. And from there, to me, one difference probably, among others, is that Mexico and the US is the most important migratory corridor in terms of flows. And this has to do also differences because Morocco is important corridor, but not the only one in relation with the two, south-north, so to speak, and the migration from, in Morocco, if I may say so, has been able, that was not necessarily a policy, but to divert what probably years ago started to look like the main corridor from Africa, South Africa, into Europe. Now it goes all over in a way, the Mediterranean. So that's a difference in terms of what you're looking for policies, so on and so forth. Also, in questions of numbers, as you said, Mexico certainly is transit for most Central Americans and South Americans. But not only that, in the last 5-10 years, perhaps, Mexico has become a transit country for people from almost all over the world. As far as I understand, there are in transit people from over 125 countries. I mean, from the 5 continents, also from Africa, Asia, and so on. So in Europe too. So that's also could be a little bit different. Also, in terms of numbers, if I correct, Amal was saying that, you know, you were able to somehow manage like something like less than 20,000 regular and perhaps some social. Well, we have to multiply that in Mexico for 5 or perhaps for 10. So that's also a difference in terms of the scale, the numbers that are involved. And also, I would say that is also important for many issues, is the fact that Mexico and the US, they have continuous, geographically speaking, physically speaking, and that's also a big difference. We are neighbors. We are neighbors in this the physical contact too. Of course, there are many others, culturally, economically, and so on and so forth. But that's perhaps is a little bit of difference. Notwithstanding all that, there is the Mediterranean Sea, and that makes a difference. Okay, so just to make a couple of points, and from there I want to try to of course, for me the temptation to ask a couple of questions is to know a little bit more about how the situation is in Morocco. Okay, in many ways, but of course, I mean, it's a reflection for all of us, and I mean, Mexicans and so on and so forth. And one of the questions I would like to raise is that I have my feeling is that in Mexico, in a way, the debate within Mexico among public opinion, observers, analysts has been a little bit in a way like focused on two extremes, so to speak, on two extremes. On the one side, there is, I would say, a tendency, and it is a reality and it's correct, that we tend to focus in criticizing, let's put it that way, our government by complying to US demands. So let's put it the other way. Or as Carlos said, there is a cooperation. In what way cooperation? Well, as you might say, I mean, in cooperation for, for the US, in this case, externalizing their controls, and making Mexico a host country. But also not only in that respect, also because for the US has pressure, has always for years, that was especially strong during the Trump government, that Mexico tried to control the flow of transit migrants. And in a way, Mexico made a decision, a strong decision, a difficult one, to send the National Guard to the south and to the north. And this has been in place since 2019. Okay, so and the question in terms of domestic debate is that this focalization on, let's say, somehow focusing on how Mexico, how easily we cooperate, we comply, and so on and so forth. But on the other side, we tend to, as I said, public opinion, most observers and analysts, we move to the other side. And basically what we have as a proposal is something like to rely on principles. And here, principles, not concrete policies, not very much concrete actions, just rely, and we have to, respect the human rights of migrants. Well, yes, okay, we all agree on that. There is, and in a way, this is also a reflection of our very long tradition in terms of foreign policy, because of our position in the world close to the US. Mexico has not for centuries, I'd say for decades, rely on this approach to rely on in foreign policy in principles without descending into more concrete propositions. So this is a little bit to me, and again, here I think we have to move a little bit more, and really as Mexican observers or Mexican analysts, we have to really confront the many challenges. We have to accept that transit migration and being a host country for refugees, the new refugees, this new wave of refugees, I said new wave of refugees in the sense that are, in my view, sort of humanitarian refugees. They are not the traditional, political, there are people who are
Much, Professor. Let's, as a way of very quick summary and basis for further discussion, I would say, well, just to confirm what Professor Alba was saying a moment ago, actually today, not only in the 80s, Mexico and Morocco are also cooperating through two persons, actually, in the Committee on Migrant Workers of the United Nations, which is the committee in charge of following up the implementation of the International Convention on the Rights of all, of the protection of the rights of all migrants and the families, and the members of the families. This committee chaired by a professor of law of in the Mexican University, Edgar Corzo, I think. And yes. The vice chairperson is a Moroccan professor as well, which is Mohamed Sharef in Agadir. So this cooperation goes on at the personal level as well in the framework of the UN system to protect migrant workers, even if we know this is a convention that has been ratified by a very low number of countries, actually 55. Both countries, both Morocco and Mexico, have ratified that convention, and this, of course, speaks in favor of their respective governments. As you also said, we have quickly gone from a seminar to a dialogue, and I'm happy of this development. Maybe we can even go a little bit further on the basis of your three cooperations on the definition of common areas of interest for eventual common research agenda between all two institutions, Policy Center for the New South and Colegio Mexicano Asuntos Internacionales. I just very quickly summarize what I see as the 5 key elements that have structured your all interventions. First, Carlos Heredia raised the issue of information. And you also mentioned something that is important, information publicly available and not publicly available. This is an issue on in the field of migration everywhere, in Morocco, in Mexico, and elsewhere. And this is important for us as researchers as well, to make sure that institutions like the observatory, the African Migration Observatory, established in Rabat in 2019, but actually being operationalized only now, it should involve also researchers and think tanks as part of the process to analyze and collect and interpret the data on international migration going through and to and from all countries. So second issue is the issue of cooperation with the big neighbors to the north, with the European Union and Spain, of course, and France and other countries, but Spain is the direct neighbor, of course, but Spain has delegated quite a part of the cooperation to the European Union, and in the Americas, of course, with the US, and how to, or I would say, what can be the role of think tanks like ours to in improving this cooperation, and in providing ideas for a better cooperation. Carlos also was mentioning the issue of what we get from them, what Morocco and Mexico get from this cooperation. I would say that it is, the challenge is more than that. The challenge is to frame cooperation on migration issues into a wider economic and development strategy for both North and South in the two cases, which is relevant both for Mexico and for Morocco. Of course, Morocco is a little bit less developed than Mexico, but in any case, they also share common challenges in terms of development. Third issue, which I wouldn't like to forget, is the issue of migrants, the rights of migrants. You have mentioned the events in Ciudad Juarez. Unfortunately, we had similar events almost 1 year ago in the border between Morocco and Melilla in Spain. This is important to take into, or to bring into the equation migrants' rights, human rights, nothing more and nothing less. And what are the implications of this cooperation and this externalization, as you have mentioned, all of you actually, of migration policies? Then the issue, I think this is also a very inspiring approach of differences, to build on similarities, but to be aware about differences and to identify them. There is a difference of magnitude. This is very clear. Also geographical differences, I would say, also a strategic difference in terms of policies and of both countries. In any case, this is a starting point also for dialogue and research on this issue. And last but not least, I think there is a challenge that we haven't explored so far. Actually, Amal has referred to it a little bit more, is the challenge of migration policies implemented by both countries, by Mexico and Morocco, to, I would say, react to those challenges, face those challenges, and at the same time to promote their own economic, social, political interest in migration, which they do have. For diplomatic reasons, for, in some cases, even for economic reasons, they do have their own interest, and it would be good that think tanks like ours contribute to assess implementation of current policies, and even more so to develop migration policies for the future. Amal has mentioned the national migration and asylum policy adopted in Morocco in 2014, the two regularization campaigns, but still it is true that this has lost a little bit of its momentum. At the time there was a ministry in charge of migration. Now it is rather a deputy minister attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This indicates also that there has been some change on the approach to the issue. And this is another area, in my opinion, that would be worth to look at into more detail and with a comparative perspective. I don't know whether there is any question in the audience, in YouTube. Since I'm not receiving any question through the chat, I would give you the chance to, for a second round of interventions, to react to each other's points, comments, to my own questions, and to advance the discussion and the dialogue, that I like this word from Professor Alba. So for this time, let's keep the same order that we did before. Carlos, can you please continue your provoking thoughts sharing?
Thank you, Ivan, and I want to thank Amal for her detailed answers to my questions in the first round. And I want to pick up on what Francisco said, that often we remain stuck in two extreme positions, either to criticize largely what the government does without taking into account the challenges at the ground level, or to say we have to base our policies on principle and not really, again, on reality. Of course, there's always those two factors are always present. And there's also the pragmatism of saying, I can sacrifice the migrants because there's no political cost of doing so. I would say the Mexican government is paying no political cost right now, no electoral cost. Even the event of the incineration of migrants did not really trigger a social response to say what are we doing? You know, what kind of ethical moral ground is there on public policy in Mexico? None. So I will try to address the challenge that Francisco raises. And I'm going to make three proposals based on policy from where we can move forward. First one is labor migration. It has been limited. It has been always under the needs of the North American labor market. Now I'm going to speak in the North American framework. Last year, the chair of the Federal Reserve gave a speech in which he said there are 11 million vacant posts in the US labor market. So the irony is that only 200 kilometers south, there's a massive sacrifice of labor force, while the US labor market is in dire straits to fill those vacant spots. I know there's a lot of bridging to build, you know, to reach from one end to the other, but those are the facts. You know, we are cohabiting in an era in which there are enormous needs for labor in the north. And that also, of course, happens in the European Union. You know, Germany is saying, I need 2 million workers to replace the labor force and pay the pensions and so forth. So that's the first one. How do we build the bridges, you know, to begin addressing migration more in a human mobility and labor mobility framework? Too many factors involved. I agree with Francisco, but that's one challenge. A second challenge is has been highlighted by the UNHCR, the High Commissioner on Refugees. In light of the most recent rules that the United States government has unilaterally launched to address flows of asylum seekers, the United States government under the Biden administration did break with the two main tenets of the Refugee Convention. First of all, they basically redefined who can be a refugee, who is eligible for refuge. There's the convention, there's the legislation, but the US government said it's not the convention, it's not the legislation, it's us that are going to define who is eligible. That's the first one. And the second one is even more worrisome because it's basically the destruction of non-refoulement. The United States government under a civilized government like the Biden administration, I'm not talking about the Trump administration, I'm talking about the Biden administration, basically unilaterally said, I decide who I am going to return and under what conditions. Non-refoulement is a vague reference. But what I'm going to do is unilaterally decided. So, of course, the most powerful government in the world, they can make unilateral decisions. But now the United Nations, even though the United States government is the largest funder of UNHCR, and UNHCR is telling the Biden administration, sir, the best thing you can do with those rules is to discard them altogether and start over. Because we cannot work under a framework that's unilaterally decided by a government who redefines altogether eligibility and non-refoulement. Third point, when I speak of a migrant-centered policy, I'm not talking about free open borders. I'm talking about something that Ivan touched upon. I'm talking about what the governments say in their documents. You know, we're gonna have policies that dignify the human being. We're gonna have policies in which migrants are not treated as criminals. Because the first challenge that we face in Mexico, where we incorporated the human rights principles into the Mexican Constitution, and we explicitly said in Mexico, being in Mexico with no papers is not a crime. It's an administrative fault. So you should not be detained and put in prison because you don't have papers. It's not a crime. But then that theoretical framework disappears. And in practice, what's happening is that migrants are treated as criminals. And I cannot accept that. That's why I say, and I want to be very clear, migrant-centered policies are those that respect the dignity of the person. It's not open borders. I'm not talking about open borders. I totally agree with Francisco. Every government of every political orientation needs to take care of their borders. Every government needs to identify the criminal bands that engage in human smuggling and human trafficking, which in some cases in Mexico is a more profitable business even than narco trafficking. So let's be clear on that. And I suggest these paths that were actually outlined to some extent in the years previous to the Trump administration in a very valuable document that we should make sure that you have it with you. It's a document, a policy paper written by former Mexican President Ernesto Zedillo and former Secretary of Commerce of Bush 43. Remind me of his name, Guadalupe, Francisco. It's Cuban born. It'll come back. The title is Shared Border, comma, and then Shared Future, question mark. So can we shift the conversation to speak about labor mobility? Can we restart the narrative of refuge, recuperating, putting back in place the definition of a refugee and non-refoulement? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Very enlightening indeed. We have 10 more minutes, so I will give Amal and Francisco the floor, and then allow you for a last sentence. But really, a last sentence, if you want, Carlos. I just would like to remind you all that actually the National Immigration and Asylum Policy in Morocco, which was launched by the King Mohammed VI, was from the outset called humanist policy. And I mentioned that because it is very similar to what you are telling Mexico. Of course, as in Mexico, implementation faces some challenges that make it more problematic in terms of respect of all human rights of migrants in all contexts. But this is directly linked, and this is why this is also relevant in this discussion. This is directly linked to the obligations that both states are taking in the framework of the cooperation on migration issues with their neighbors to the north, to the US and the European Union. In any case, I think it is very interesting that you have brought into the conversation, Carlos, this issue of labor mobility, labor migration. Both the United States, but even more so the European Union, need foreign labor of all kinds, highly qualified and non-qualified foreign labor. And this is certainly one additional element that we cannot keep out of the research, of the discussion, is to recover the concept of legal pathways to migration, which is being lost somehow in the conversation. Amal, please, not more than 5 minutes for a second round of thoughts.
Sure. Actually, I'll be very quick. I do agree with all the challenges that Professor Carlos has mentioned on the gap also between the words, the policies that we have and the implementation. But as I have mentioned, really the issue is also with the development challenges that you also mentioned, that our two countries are facing, which are making the situation really difficult. And of course, this is not to waive the responsibility on the importance to take into consideration seriously the situation of migrants and also of refugees. And I really appreciated what has Professor Carlos said on the fact that the United States of America is actually redefining what a refugee is, although there is an existing framework on the entitlement and the rights of refugees that has the status of international convention. So yes, I think that I have no more words to add on this specific aspect, but I wanted also just to add one aspect of difference to what Professor Francisco has mentioned when it comes to the differences of our countries. I think that one challenge that Morocco is facing and Mexico is not, is that Morocco is often having to deal with the question of migration and collaboration with the EU as a group of countries rather than one country. And this is really very challenging to any other third partner country. I think that I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I will gladly elaborate on the points.
Thank you very much, Amal. This is a very interesting insight, indeed, the fact that the European Union is not necessarily coherent and a single interlocutor, which also gives a country like Morocco more scope for ins and outs in the negotiations. I mean, this has, of course, negative sides, but also positive sides in terms of leverage in the cooperation in the field of migration. And also, I mean, for instance, Morocco is refusing, rightly so, in my opinion, to sign the admission agreement with the European Union, but it does have readmission agreements with Spain and actually with France as well, which is it just makes more complex the understanding of the stakes and the challenges. Francisco, now you turn, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I think Amal, I think your point is very, very, really interesting in a way that, in the sense that in Morocco and the European Union, there are many agents involved on the Moroccan side, let's say, on the other side. Well, that's very, very nice. Just Ivana, just a small comment in relation to what you said in your previous intervention. I feel proud that I was member of the UN Migration Commission when it started, right? And it was also a Moroccan over there in that. As a matter of fact, both of us work in that position for let's say, two nominations for 4 years and another 4 years. And also, just for the rest, is that even if we are in a way proposed and nominated by our countries, we are voted at the UN level in New York. And once we are member of that, we are not representing the countries. We are working there as an independent persons. Okay, but just I could. Well, you know, there are too many things really to react, and I'm gonna say just a couple of things. I mean, Carlos, you have. I mean, we should have a 3 hours, 4 hours, or 2 days conversation on all those issues. Well, first of all, in relation with the and it's really Ivan, you said the importance of cooperation and all that. And Carlos, you were talking about also labor, you know, mobility and so on and so forth. Here, just, you know, out of, you know, a note of, I don't know if it's to say caution or something, is the realities, is that we are nowadays facing in really very serious questions regarding the U.S. position. Is the fact that migration has increasingly become an issue that is debated at the public level. It's becoming in elections. And now this is a reality that in a way, I mean, we have to deal with it. And in this context that in the next elections, migration is going to be one of the key issues in a way that even could be even decisive for the next president. So that makes you, I mean, Amal, you said, and most of us agrees, migration has become a very sensitive issue all over the world. It's a global, very sensitive issue. And of course, that makes very difficult, you know, to come forward with certain solutions. And a reflection of that is that the US, for almost 2 decades or more, even after September 11, hasn't been able to come with a new immigration policy. All they said, I mean, all of the politicians and observers, that the system is broken, but there has been no solutions. And this is so a sort of stalemate and so on and so forth. So just like was the other point that I would like to raise is that, and I think that was raised in a way by Ivan, but also by Carlos, certainly, Amal. Amal, yes. Well, is the issue of implementation. And I think this is also, in a way, has ramifications at the let's say, international level, so to speak. But this is really the most serious one is a domestic issue. How to implement your own laws. And here I want to make just a relation with what I was saying about this tendency of ours, Mexico in general, to rely on policies of principles, is that we have a migration law 2011. Oh, this is very progressive. You can say whatever. Yeah, it's very progressive. Yeah, but it's there. Also, we have, Carlos said, the Mexico made the conventions that Mexico has signed are become part of at the level of the Constitution. So imagine the responsibilities, the obligations we have. In a way, in my view, it's a little bit, but we made those decisions without almost looking into the implications that they might have. And after that, of course, the implementation is quite afar from the principle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Carlos, if you want to close the discussion with one sentence, and I will close with one conclusion. Carlos?
Yeah, just saying that this has been a very fruitful discussion, thanks to PCNS and to COMEXI, and we need a follow-up.
Absolutely. I think that you reflect the feeling of all three speakers and myself and the organizers. I think, thank you, Francisco, for bringing into the discussion the issue of politicization of migration policy, which is in the European Union is a very serious issue as well, which very often prevents to adopt rational migration policies and sometimes even humanist migration policies. Yeah. In any case, I think, and I talk under your control, but I think that there is a kind of some consensual points I identify from your three interventions. Despite this politicization, I think that neither Mexico nor Morocco is accepting the role as watchdog of US or European Union borders. Migration containment cannot consist in cooperation in the field of migration cannot consist only on migration containment. This has to be framed into a wider development and economic cooperation, including, of course, labor migration, as Carlos mentioned, and with a humanist approach, as I mentioned that the Moroccan policies explicitly stating. Actually, both governments are, at least at the level of public discourse, very, very articulate on this approach. And as you mentioned, Carlos, I think that this has been the first activity jointly organized by the Policy Center for the New South and the COMEXI. We all hope that this will not be the last one. I think that we have set out a few interesting elements for further cooperation, for other activities, for a joint research agenda, and I hope that this is only the first step into fruitful cooperation in the future between our two institutions. Bye-bye, and thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amal. Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, Guadalupe, of course. And thank you, Carlos. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.